Yeah, blessed love, blessed love. Yes, I'm just recording this before it gets too late. But yeah, I said there was going to be a part two of today's reading, Leviticus 12. So I reached out to Dr Alexandra Sellassie Antohin. She's a member of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and also an anthropologist and scholar in Ethiopian and Orthodox history and theology and culture. And she wrote this incredible book, The Covenant Veil, which came out just at the end of last year. So yeah, I reached out to her this morning to also provide a reflection about Leviticus 12, given the perspective of her research and knowledge of Ethiopia and Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So here's what she had to say. I'll play the clip now.
Greetings, Malcolm Gana, Merry Christmas. I've been invited to offer a few reflections as part of Haile Mariam's scriptural reasonings, and I'm happy to offer a few words in relation to Leviticus 12, a passage that really talks about women's biology and women's bodies as polluting or perhaps needing to go through some kind of purification process in relation to sacred spaces. I can say that, I will mostly offer my reflections as someone who's done fieldwork in places like Ethiopia and Russia, because this notion of a woman's unclean body is less pronounced in churches in the United States or the UK, where I have other experiences in Orthodox with Orthodox communities. I'll also say that it's not unusual for religious traditions to have notions of taboos around menstruation, around women in childbearing and life-giving force, because I think in many ways, if I were to take a feminist perspective, the notion of bringing life into this world is incredibly powerful and incredibly both life-giving and the notion of blood is something as giving life but also bringing death. So it has those resonances that I think make it dangerous and perhaps polluting. But I won't go into that because there's been a lot of theories around that, and one can get a little too universal around that. I think it's worth saying that there has been a fair deal of field work done, or analysis done around Ethiopian Orthodox notions of purity and impurity, and how one keeps their body in a place that can live a prayerful life and live in a way that is in alignment with the church's teachings, and participating in things like the sacrament of the Eucharist and in the liturgy even. But I will offer like two things that I thought about when I read that passage. One is this idea of preserving, the spiritual sanctity of the spiritual center in a church. And I think for me, it takes on a very physical form. When I was a field worker in northern Ethiopia, I was asked this question from time to time around this idea of whether I'm clean. That's literally the word. Not unclean. Am I clean enough to even enter the church? The outer part of the church. In my situations, these would be mostly village churches that would be round and have various passages before even getting to the sanctuary, which is not something that women are allowed to enter. So the idea that it couldn't even step into a church sort of heightened my understanding of the ways in which women's bodies are regarded in the Orthodox framework of what is not just clean and unclean with regards to corporal reality, but also what it takes to maintain the spiritual, the sanctity of churches as the most concentrated parts, corners of God's presence on earth. So that's one thing that comes to mind. Another is an exercise in self-assessment of one's own impurity. So, and this for me is really, again, a very Ethiopian context. I'd be really curious to know if this is something that carries over in contexts where church compounds, church spaces looks slightly different, but in Ethiopia, the outer part of a church is also very, very active in terms of devotional practices. People are there praying, kneeling, prostrating, participating in the liturgy, just like you would in the inside. And it was shared with me a few times that standing outside the church, including standing all the way to the gate, maybe, is a way of marking one's distance from God, or one's not being ready to be so close to God. And I think, and again, it's in some ways one of the really specific aspects of Orthodox Christianity, that you can sort of, in a material sense, come close or be far from God. And this could be and this applies to both women and men. Things like whether you abstain from sexual activity, whether you've fasted adequately before coming to church, whether you've read the scriptures or done your devotional prayers. Have you done what you have to do as a person to be ready, to be clean? So the cleanness can look differently, is what I'm trying to say. And the last point I'll make is the passage, at the end of the passage, it talks about offerings of, to atone or to cleanse a woman after she's given birth, a lamb, giving doves and pigeons. And one particular effective moment I had was watching a woman fulfill a vow when she finally gave birth, after many years of infertility, and obviously through the intercession of Mary, was able to bring a child into this world. And which, at this particular instance, I was in a church, and she gave an offering, but it was a gift to the church of ceremonial cloths and an umbrella. And so for me, I felt like this was a way of, in this case, it wasn't so much about clean and unclean, but more about what do we offer the church to glorify it, and to glorify it in the sense of the saint as well. I think it's really important. In this case, it's giving to Mary. It wasn't so much the church. That wouldn't be how it's communicated. So I hope that those are some things to think about as we think about this idea of being clean, and what, to the extent that we do the work to be clean, both as women, as well as just Christians in general.
So I know that the end of that clip cut off just slightly early, and she said, Christians in general, and she just gave thanks for the opportunity for being able to share her thoughts. And it's really interesting for what she had to say about how cleanliness is kind of interpreted, and different levels of what that terminology means in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So thank you to Dr Alexandra for that contribution, and also to Helen Headley Kwan as well for your earlier contribution. And a very small chapter, short chapter, but there's a huge amount to discuss. So thank you to both of you for providing those thoughts, which I couldn't have done alone. So give thanks, blessed love, and more tomorrow. One love.